I tell my students, hey, you got to bridge and shrimp and get your knee back inside. I look at them, they look at me like, Coach Matt, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? What does a bridge mean? And then I'm like, okay, guys, bring it in, circle up. Okay, here's how you bridge. Everybody start bridging. I look around. Nobody can do a fucking bridge.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Delbra.
Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Today, we are going to discuss the topic of practice, specifically building the perfect practice. We are always, as coaches and practitioners, in search of finding the perfect practice. Before we get into today's topic, please like, share, subscribe. Leave a comment or a review wherever you can, wherever you listen to your podcasts. All of your support really, really helps. Again, check the links in the bottom if you want to support the show. The best way to support the show is to subscribe to my online academy, or also like and share and subscribe my YouTube pages. First of all, this one, the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast, but also the On Guard BJJ online YouTube channel. Every subscription helps. Every like helps. Thank you so much, you guys. Okay, so designing the perfect practice. I've been coaching jiu-jitsu probably for around 10 years now. Ever since I got my purple belt, I started stepping into coaching roles, and coaching was just something that I really, really enjoyed. I love to practice. I know that there's a lot of even great athletes throughout history who have talked about how much they hate practicing. For me, I love practicing. It's one of the most fun parts of learning any skill, in my opinion. And I love the struggle, the grind of jiu-jitsu practice. Understand that you're going to compete and you're going to fight the way that you practice. And so not all practices are created equal. And we can see this, especially if you cross-train in other gyms. Everybody has a different way that they like to teach something, especially jiu-jitsu. There's so many different ways to approach the sport. And in this episode, I want to go over a bunch of different methods that I like to use, and also what I believe to be the most effective way to coach your students and learn the sport of jiu-jitsu. I'd like to use a quote here by NFL coach, legendary coach Vince Lombardi. And Vince Lombardi said, "Practice does not make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect." And so I actually don't believe that perfection can really be reached. I remember when people would call me, layman people would call me, jiu-jitsu master or master of culinary arts. You're a chef or whatever. You're like, you've reached the top pinnacle. But for me, I never really believed that there was anything that you could never accomplish enough to be considered a master in anything. Maybe to the average person you are, but in cooking, there's just so much to learn. I never really considered myself a master because I was always learning. I would always run into problems where I wouldn't have answers. And so how could I consider myself a master? And I believe jiu-jitsu is the exact same way. And that's where I really have adopted like you are forever a white belt. You're always forever in search of finding the best way rather than you're the master. You understand everything. I don't like the word master because it insinuates that you know everything, or, that you have some sort of almighty knowledge or authority over other people. And I just don't have that. I always run into issues. I always run into situations where I don't know the answer. And so that's actually what motivates me to keep doing a sport like jiu-jitsu. And when it comes to making a perfect practice, I don't know that there's such a thing as having a perfect practice, but we can damn near aim pretty high. And if we aim our shot pretty high, then we can reach pretty high levels. My practice structure is always changing. I remember back, in my early days, there'd be lots of line drills and things like this. Dare I say even animal drills where you're doing bear crawls down the mats and things like that. I will say that these movements, I do believe for really uncoordinated people, I think these movements can be beneficial. However, I don't know how much they are going to actually improve somebody's skill when grappling another human being. But I have seen people use these drills to become quite coordinated, adults, kids. So I don't want to shit on animal drills like I always do and act like they don't have any kind of value. But I will say that in terms of building jujitsu skills, most of the time, I think that those skills are better. That time is better allotted towards like drilling. And we're going to talk about drilling and what I believe is effective drilling later on in this episode. Obviously, sparring, live situations, and yes, even showing technique. Explicit instruction, I still think is very, very valuable. For the most part, I believe that practice should be about skill development. And so my philosophy on practice has changed a lot, because before it would be, a lot of movement and conditioning based. And I do believe that conditioning is an important part of practice, but I believe the main function of practice should be one thing, and that's to make somebody better, to improve their skills. I saw an awesome reel on Instagram the other day. I can't remember who the coach was. It was a wrestling coach, and they said, "What are we working on today in practice?" They were interviewing him, and he said, "Getting better." And then they said, "Okay, how long's practice going to be?" And he said, "However long it takes to get better." And he's like, "You think I'm joking? I'm not. That's what our practice is about today." And that's such a great, it's so simple, but yet so complex at the same time. It's such a vague statement, but yet it is so complex. What does that mean? Get better. There's so many areas in jiu-jitsu to get better. And the truth is, if we're being totally honest, you cannot improve in every single area in one practice. And so when I think about the perfect practice, usually I'm thinking about like a series of weeks or even a month, where some days are going to be light. Some days are going to be more physically demanding. We're going to be based around conditioning. Some days might be more situational if we're preparing for a competition. We might be putting ourselves in scenarios where we're down points. We might be putting ourselves in situations where our teammates are watching us to add stress and pressure and the thought of losing in front of other people. We might be stacking cardio and calisthenics and plyometrics and then going right into live sparring when you're tired and now you're trying to make your technique work. Like, these are all methods and variables that we could add to the training to make it more competition specific. But then there's going to be other days based more around skill development, where it's, maybe we've had a hard training week, or the last 2 days, 3 days, or the last 4 days out of the last 7 days have been very hard training, and everybody's getting kind of tired and burnt out. And we know that we can't output the same way that we could earlier in the week. It might make sense to have more of a technical approach, a more skill development approach to practice. And just because you're not, busting your ass or getting absolutely dead tired in practice, that doesn't mean you can't accomplish a lot. Skill development is a huge part of practice, but regardless, your goal should just be improvement, getting better, whatever that may be. So certain days can definitely be harder than other days. Some hard days we're testing conditioning and are getting outside of our comfort zone, and other days we're just working on new material, trying to experiment and have those back and forth dialogue days where everybody's chatting. And I believe that these are all very, very important. You can't just go into every single practice going as hard as you can. It's very, very difficult to keep that pace and to avoid injury, and to do that even as you're getting into your later 30s and into your 40s. It's always going to be difficult to keep up 100% pace. And so we must change the variables of practice to reach certain goals. But the main goal is always to get better. And I believe that practice ideally, it should extend beyond the dojo, like mental training, watching videos. I've talked about it ad nauseum on the podcast before. It's so important that you are studying outside of the gym, that you are looking outward towards other instructors, not just your instructor. Trust me, your instructor doesn't know everything. I'm not going to go any further into that. You guys, there's so much information out there. You have to extend practice beyond the dojo, whether it's mental training or physical training, which we're also going to talk about. So right now, I'm not a fitness expert by any means. Most of the fitness that I've done has been angled towards how am I going to get better at jiu-jitsu. But, we could quickly just touch on a couple of different aspects of fitness. So the main things that you're usually going to hear about when we talk about like outside of jiu-jitsu training off the mats, when we're heading into the weight room, and our skill or our practice is now based towards becoming a better athlete and not becoming better at the skill of jiu-jitsu. You're going to hear words like strength, speed, power, flexibility, agility. So strength, essentially how much weight can you move? How much force can you exert? Speed, how fast can you move that force? Power is the combination of strength and speed. Flexibility, taking your muscles and your joints to their maximum ranges of motion. And agility, the ability to move and to change direction quickly. And I've neglected a lot of these things, specifically power and agility were two things that I neglected a lot. And lately I've been really trying to incorporate exercises like plyometrics, and explosive training to try and increase those things. And I play hockey as well, which is a very explosive sport. And so I've noticed that the plyometrics have really helped me actually just from doing them for a couple of months. So I've added things like that into my workout because I want to just become a better athlete overall. And it's definitely translated to my movement on the mats. So let's talk about something that you will see a lot of coaches, especially strength and conditioning coaches, talk about online. And that's for sport-specific exercises in the weight room. So an athlete has gone to the weight room to now become a better athlete, increase their strength, speed, power, flexibility, agility, whatever. Balance is another one. And they are doing like sport-specific movements. And we'll see sometimes fighters have like a montage for their preparation where they'll be like a judo fighter doing uchikomi with bands, right? Or tying a gi to a pull-up bar and doing pull-ups, movements like that, or doing like sprawling underneath a punching bag or things like this, and they're kind of mixing in the weight room movements with their sport-specific movements in hopes that this will increase performance or increase their skill in the sport. And this has now become a bit of a debate. A lot of coaches believe that they're advocating for training like functional, fundamental movement patterns such as squatting, deadlifting, sprinting, jumping, Olympic lifting, pushing, and pulling. These are kind of like our basic human movement patterns in the weight room. And they're saying that you should just focus on these movements over sport-specific training movements. So instead of doing like uchikomi with the bands, that they believe that doesn't necessarily translate to explosiveness or skill development. Rather, you should build a good pulling pattern and find maximum output and pull weights not only with heavy amounts, but to pull at a high speed so you can build your power and do all these different types of lifts inside the weight room, but then also practice your skill development in the jiu-jitsu school. So this would mean, okay, grab a partner and now start practice pulling them around. Start seeing if you can break their balance, whatever kind of task-focused games or whatever kind of drills you want to do to develop that skill. They're essentially saying keep the weight room, and keep the sport-specific movements on the mat so that you can learn the skills and improve your skills on the mats, become a better athlete in the weight room. So there's definitely a clash of philosophy here. Like a lot of coaches will do sport specific movements. Another one I see a lot is in judo and in wrestling practice. This is old. You do like a single leg on your partner, pick them up and run them down the mat. Now run them back. Okay, now do a fireman's carry, pick your partner up, run them down, run them back. Is this translating and making us better grapplers? Hard to say. It's undoubtedly difficult and it's going to tax your body and make you a better athlete. I have no doubt about that. But at the same time, does it mean that you're a better wrestler? Does it build your wrestling skills better? Does it make your shot better? Does it give you a good option off of your single leg series? It's arguable. So what a lot of these guys are saying is, hey, do that work in the weight room, all the conditioning stuff in the weight room, and leave the technical stuff onto the mats. I do believe there is a bit of a balance. I think anybody who's serious as an athlete should separate the two and have dedicated training to conditioning and strength and then dedicated training to developing the skill. The truth is that not every student's going to have that ability. There are definitely students, and myself as included, who totally neglected the weight room for years and just focused on the mats. And so these guys aren't getting those patterned movements that are so fundamental to a good athlete. They're just doing the movements that jiu-jitsu has. And you got to ask yourself, are they getting everything that they need to be the best athlete that they can be? And it's debatable. So for me personally, lately I've shifted my focus towards leaving all of those movements in the weight room while incorporating things like plyometrics to build power and agility. Skipping, because it's damn difficult, takes a lot of coordination, and also helps you be lighter on your feet. And then leaving my sport specific training to the sport. Whether I want to be a better wrestler, I'm going to wrestling practices. If I want to do better in judo, I'm trying not to pull guard. I'm trying to stand in the gi, etc. Right. So this is sort of, it's a debatable thing. I think when we're designing a practice specifically for the improvement of BJJ, for me, when it comes to conditioning, I would rather the conditioning come through rounds and jiu-jitsu specific situations, as opposed to, we're going to stand over our partner and do pull-ups with their collars while they're lying underneath us, right? And I've been to practices like that. I just don't know how good of a use of time that is. And I think that there's better ways that we could target those muscle groups and build strength and power in those muscles within the weight room. So for me, like I said, I think to design the perfect practice, there may be not one perfect practice, but there could be a series of practices within 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks where combined we could become not only better at jiu-jitsu or our sport specific activity, but also a better athlete within the weight room. And just a side note about lifting weights, like I said, I neglected lifting weights for years. I used to do it a bunch. Then I got into jiu-jitsu, and I kind of listened to the old Marcelo Garcia quote. And he said, if you want to get better at cardio, do it in jiu-jitsu. If you want to get stronger, do it through jiu-jitsu. Everything is on the mats for Marcelo. He never advocated for weightlifting or, getting in the weight room and getting shredded or build it, getting personal records or anything like that. And so I sort of followed that. But as I get older, I definitely see the value in weightlifting because it'll make you stronger, faster, more resilient to injury if you spend time in the weight room. And then, of course, you get better at the sport by spending time doing the sport, perfecting things like timing and pacing and of course, your technique. Okay. Like I said, plyometrics, strength and conditioning. The goal is essentially to build speed, power, strength, flexibility, agility. Strength training is super important for building muscle, strengthening your tendons, ligaments, and building bone density. And the power and the directional change, the agility that you get through plyometrics. I'm really starting to become a big fan of plyometrics when I never did them before. Like jumping, basically. Lots of jumping, lots of leaping, jumping side to side. Very much can help you build a strong athletic foundation, especially in your hip hinge and in your core and around your trunk area, which is, if you think about grappling, that's what we're using the entire time. Should we stretch? There's a lot of different outlooks on stretching. I believe stretching is important. I do know some people stretch in practice, like they will, after practice, they'll carve aside a little 5-minute thing with their students to stretch. I believe stretching should be done outside of practice personally. I don't enforce stretching in my practices, but I think stretching is important for obvious reasons, lengthening your muscles and finding full ranges of movement and good for your joints and things like this. I think any mobility exercises that we do, especially as we age, are very, very important. And I think it should be up to the individual to do strength training and stretching outside of jiu-jitsu practice time. That is my opinion. And it doesn't really take too long. It's about, 10 minutes a day, I think would be enough. I'll also say there's an honorable mention I'd like to make towards breathing exercises and training your pelvic floor, which is something that we don't really talk about too much. A lot of people overlook these aspects, training your pelvic floor, essentially doing Kegels, which is where you're like tensing your pelvic floor, almost like you're trying to hold in a pee. They've said that this can increase not only sexual performance, but also athletic performance. And breathing, there's things called box breathing, Wim Hof breathing. Of course, Wim Hof is like a legend, the Iceman, they call him. If you've ever tried some of these breathing exercises, they can actually be quite challenging. And man, I really love doing these breathing exercises. They're not easy, but you definitely feel amazing after you do them. So I would definitely recommend, especially if you're a competitor, if you're a serious athlete, adopting some kind of breath work into your into your practice. And that, I'm not saying do it in practice, but again, outside of practice, it can really help you calm your nerves. A lot of athletes, I know Joseph Chen has talked about how breath work has really helped him before competition. Of course, my buddy Josh McKinney, he's a big fan of Wim Hof breathing before competition. It sort of keeps you present, and it makes sure that you're not exerting any unnecessary energy elsewhere before you step onto the mat. So breath work is definitely something that is underappreciated, I think, for any athlete, especially in jiu-jitsu. We already talked about mental study, comp tapes. Let's talk about recovery. You know, we talked about how we can't go 100% every practice. That's important. You know, Danaher said something months ago, and it was like, I expect my students to train every day, but I don't expect them to train hard every day. Not every day has to be hard training. You know, probably you're looking at like 5 to 6 days of hard training a week. And then the other 1, 2, or even 3 days could be dedicated towards recovery, mental study, just getting a light sweat, whether you like to run. I love to ride a bike as well. I find it very relaxing and easy and enjoyable. Stretching, yoga, if that's something you're into, sauna, whatever it may be. There's always ways that you can train without taxing your body so hard. A lot of athletes will call this like active recovery, right? Or go for a swim, something like that. Take time away from the sport that you normally do every day, but still you're getting some kind of a workout. You're taxing the body a little bit and encouraging a recovery cycle. I think that active recovery days are very, very important. And not a day goes by where I do like nothing. I always try to, if I'm not working out one day and I'm like dedicating that day to not taxing my body, I'm going to be studying, or I'm going to be stretching. I'm going to do something. I'm going to do some kind of physio for my knee or my shoulder. Just do something. It doesn't even have to be too long. It could be like 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay. Should recreational players train like competitors? This is a question that I was asked actually months ago. And it kind of depends the culture of the jiu-jitsu academy that you're at. If you're at an academy that is 100% recreational, probably nobody is training like a competitor. If you're at an academy that is 100% competitor based and it's all about winning championships, just by osmosis of being in the room, you're probably going to be training like a competitor. And what does that mean? High intensity, doing the most current techniques, difficult training partners. Everybody's thinking about how they're going to win the rules, how they're going to score the game. These are all things that I think are actually beneficial, even if you're not a competitor. And again, I'm biased. I come from a competitor background. I'm sure there's going to be recreational people who disagree with me. They want to go to the gym and just have fun. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think everybody has to find the gym culture that they fit best within. But for me, if let's say you're a practitioner and you're like not a competitor, but you still want to get your black belt, in my opinion, that black belt is an apprenticeship essentially. And so I would want to do my apprenticeship under someone legit, someone who's been in the shit before, who has competed. Or if I was a plumber, I'd want to go to somebody who's a damn good plumber, somebody who's been in some tough situations. They've done big projects. They've had tough problems they've had to solve on the fly. They've essentially ecoed their way through these difficult problems and come out on the other side of it like really, really good plumbers. And they just know the industry in and out. Like that's the type of apprenticeship I want. I don't want to do my apprenticeship under someone who's never competed, doesn't understand the needs of a competitor or even the demands of, competing on the modern jiu-jitsu current landscape. It just, for me, it's not really interesting to have an instructor like that because they are shutting down so many aspects of the sport. Whereas if you go under somebody who's competed a bunch, maybe they've won some tournaments, maybe they've built some really strong competitors. Even if you're not a competitor, even if that's not your goal, you are still getting a high level of jiu-jitsu through a lens that is, I don't even know what you would call it, validated, legit. Like that is somebody that I would want to train under because they've been in high level rooms. They've been in high level situations and they've worked with high level people. And so I feel like if you're going to be doing your apprenticeship, if you're going to be dedicating 10 plus years of your life to getting your black belt, you might as well spend that time and money. Even if it's more difficult, you might as well spend it in a way where you're definitely going to benefit from it, because you can definitely spend 10 years at a school that doesn't have very current training methods and you're not going to be improving that much. And that to me is a little bit of a waste of time. So I think that recreational people, they don't have to do, crazy strength and conditioning exercises. I'm not saying that they need to really focus on becoming a better athlete necessarily, but in terms of training with really good athletes and really good practitioners and competitors, they're just going to naturally get better. And from a skill development standpoint, I think that is something that's very, very important, right? Obviously, less of an emphasis on these recreational practitioners becoming better athletes. Although I think everybody should strive to become the best physical condition that they can be in, just because I think that, that's my philosophy, just for anybody. But I do believe that it's important for people to understand, hey, if you're going in jiu-jitsu, like, you should be stepping outside of your comfort zone. You should be stepping into the hard roles, training with the hard competitors, the people who are going to kick your butt. It's kind of part of it, right? And it will only make you better, right? So that's my opinion on recreational people training with competitors. Let's talk about warm-ups, because we are talking about building a perfect practice. Should we warm up? And if we should, what is a good warm-up? Again, I think that the animal drills and things like that, sometimes I think for kids, maybe once a week, it's a decent warm-up, because they do need to learn how to do things like invert and shrimp and sit out and shoot and all these different fundamental grappling movements. But when it comes to, adults and higher level competitors and things like that, I don't think that this is necessarily the best warm up. I think warm ups can be done in better ways. I think it's absolutely necessary to do some kind of a warm up. Although a warm up to me that is a complete waste of time would be like calisthenics. Like, let's do push ups, let's do jumping jacks. This is all bullshit. This literally can be done on your own time. You don't need to be paying anybody to be doing those things in the jiu-jitsu gym. As jumping on someone's back and having them piggyback you around the mat while they're sprinting. These are pretty old school martial arts training methods. And I'm not going to say they're not going to improve your conditioning or your strength. I'm just saying you are not building skills within the sport of jiu-jitsu. And while we're on the mats, we should be trying to get better at the sport of jiu-jitsu. And so I believe that things like drilling, partner drilling is very, very, is important. And again, we're almost at the drilling section we're going to talk about extensively, but finding a partner and doing a sport specific movement or situation where you could drill and work through a very much sport specific situation, I think is much more valuable than doing push-ups, jumping jacks, burpees, things like this. Even like doing an eco game, a very basic eco game is a great way to warm up, because again, it's sport specific. You're now putting the person into a sport specific situation for jiu-jitsu. They're getting immediate feedback from that. You're flip-flopping with your partner, going into different positions, and 10, 15 minutes of this, and your class is like a quarter of the way done, and now you're warm and you've really accomplished something. So I do think it is important to warm up. You should not just be going into sparring 100% cold, in my opinion. When I was 20, it wouldn't be an issue, but now things have changed. I'm getting older. What about lessons? Lesson design. So the perfect practice. Jiu-jitsu is so infinite. Some days my hardest job is to decide what I'm not going to teach, because I want to teach everything. I want to show everything I know, but that isn't necessarily the best way to learn. The more you show, the more times your practice can get hazy and kind of unfocused. Sometimes it's better to just do less. Keeping things simple and fundamental is really, really important, I think, when you're doing practice. That's not to say that things can't be advanced or intricate. It's just to say, things should flow in some sort of related way. When you're doing practice, I believe that your warm-up should be related to the technique you're planning on doing, and the situations you're going to spar should all be sort of related within that theme. Now, there are different ways, and I've experimented with this for like over a year. There's different ways to run practices. Like when I spoke with Greg Souders, he talked about how they like to play games in two different scenarios. So one week would be like pins, and they would play some games from pins, and then halfway through practice, they would change it completely. And now all of a sudden we're doing standing versus standing, or we're doing, a guarded situation or whatever. And so I think that this variability is actually good because it does shock the brain, and it does sort of stimulate your learning centers, but that's not something that I'm going to recommend every time. Again, a practice could be all related to one theme. And then the next day you could go into practice and it's like a bunch of different themes and that really make you think. So is there a right or wrong answer as to, the actual material you're going to be practicing? I don't think there really is, but I do think that the student should perceive some kind of a relative thing from from the first couple games you play. And if the practice is not based around that one situation, now at least there's a couple of games and some time dedicated to that situation before you switch to a new topic. And I don't think there's anything wrong with switching to a new topic partway through practice, but it would be weird to just have things scattered all over the place in an unrelated way. Unless, let's say we do have one of these, unless let's say your class is a dedicated drilling class. You could absolutely do like 5 or 6 different drills within that class that are all different. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that either, as long as the games and drills are designed to make the student better in those situations. I also think that, you should add intensity to these drills so that these drills are not just drilling against non-resistance, which is what the whole ecological crowd talks about, is how, drilling against non-resistance is a waste of time. It's like, is it though? Like, I think I agree with what they're saying. For if you're only at a gym where all you do is drill versus non-resistance, yes, that's not good. I don't think people are really doing that anymore. And if people are doing that, let's just say those are probably jiu-jitsu schools that are, for lack of a better word, not serious, not high level, right? Doing drills for reps like that, just with somebody who's just lying there, is not really going to give you much. But now you get that person to start reacting and giving you reactions, even if it's very light reactions. You still are getting reactions. You are still now getting some form of resistance. And then over time, whether it's, a couple of months when your students finally understand the situation, or if it's within the class, even if you have high level students, you can start to increase the resistance right away. And have them start to build on that resistance. And now before you know it, it's almost turning into like target sparring or a task focused game. And so, when we're drilling, I guess we're getting into the drilling section here. Drilling versus no resistance. The only time that I recommend drilling versus no resistance is if it's a brand new move and people, have no idea how to do it. Classic example, berimbolo or a heel hook. This is the one I always bring up to the eco guys. How are you going to teach someone to do a berimbolo in the eco fashion? Like, you have to be able to do an inversion and feel the move first. And so I feel like the whole debate of eco versus drilling against no resistance is kind of a stupid one. I don't think anybody's advocating for just drilling with no resistance. I think a lot of people are advocating for drilling to understand how a move works, and then increasing resistance from the training partner, from Uke, who's the drilling partner. And so then you get into this sort of live drilling situation. And that's the type of drilling that I think is incredibly valuable. Drilling with minor resistance. Another thing I love is creative drilling. And so this is something that we see Danaher talk about at New Wave. Creative drilling is where, you'll give your student like some kind of a task in a situation, and then the task, you give them the freedom to finish the drill however you like, or you give them some degree of freedom so that when they're drilling, they have the ability to switch off to a submission or a back take or whatever it may be. And so it encourages the student to kind of use what is given in front of them. And in that way, I really believe that, you can still improve greatly. Like, not every session with your training partners needs to be 100% trying to win a task-focused game, right? I believe that task-focused games are fantastic ways to learn. We all know one of the biggest reasons why judo was so effective when it first came on the scene. Again, check out my history of BJJ series that I have. I think it's episodes 13 and 14. We found out that judo was just so much more effective because they were able to use these techniques safely in a live situation, and it's called randori. And through randori and live training, that's like the best way to build these skills, okay? But what if I were to tell you, okay, this move exists. You can throw somebody like this. So now I tell you to do it without even feeling it or without even trying it. Or I ask a beginner to take a fall without even showing them how to break their fall. I don't know that that's very, very useful. You have to learn these basic fundamental movements before we can add resistance. And that's just my opinion. Again, the eco guys might disagree with this. No, everything needs to have some degree of resistance. But, you talk to the best, you watch the best teams in the world. They're all doing drills, whether it's New Wave or AOJ or Marcelo's, whatever. They're all doing drills. And I think you can benefit greatly from drilling with creativity and also adding resistance, because then it does turn into almost task-focused games. So for me, and to wrap things up, when we talk about the subject of drilling and practice, I do believe drilling is incredibly important. There was a period where I was getting into the eco stuff and I went full eco for like a year. And now we've recently gone back to drilling, and I'm getting so many positive comments about people loving the drilling, because we're not just drilling against no resistance, but I'm giving the uke, also I'm giving them task goals. And I'm saying, let's make this sort of a real situation, but still it's drilling. And in this way, so many people have responded positively. They've even said, I've noticed that my movements have improved just because we're drilling more and more. And so, I don't think it's, to wrap everything up, I don't think a good use of drilling is to just always go against non-resistance. And I think that anyone who does that is not even really trying to find the best way to coach. You got to always have some form of resistance. But with a new technique or a new submission, you do, to some degree, have to introduce it. And sometimes that involves introducing that technique or that skill versus no resistance so that the person can feel it. And then we can gradually add the resistance. Should we do solo drills? I've gone back and forth with solo drills, and I recently started incorporating solo drills into my TOTS class, ages 5 to 9. And I think it's incredibly valuable to add solo drills. I remember when I was coming up and I was learning things like shrimp, like back in the white belt days, blue belt days, shrimps, how to invert. Like inverting is not an easy movement for the average person, right? Like I can go upside down, no problem, but I've also been doing jiu-jitsu for 16 years. There's a lot of people who can't even invert, and they might even be blue or purple belts. They just never tried it because they came from a school that never did it. And so is it valuable to offer these solo drill movements? I'll say this. I've seen students jiu-jitsu improve like their guard recovery after introducing some of these fundamental movements. And even you watch a guy like Danaher, he has a whole instructional that he released on solo movements because of COVID. He released that. He also has his one of his most recent instructions about the fastest way to retaining your guard or whatever. It's a Nogi instructional. The entire first chapter is like 12 fundamental solo movements. So if a guy like Danaher thinks that those movements are useful, I think it's pretty ignorant and arrogant to just disregard them as valuable at all. I think for kids and for beginners, those types of movements are incredibly important. I was watching that DVD from Danaher and I was like, man, there's details in these movements that I didn't know. And I've been doing this sport for like 16 years. So if I don't know them, I'm sure a lot of other people don't know them. And, are we just going to say, no, that's useless because it's not going to help you grapple with another body, right? It's only going to help you get good at the solo movement. Is there a transfer of skill? This is the ecological argument. And I believe that it absolutely is. Same thing with partnered movement drills. Are these drills important? Like movement-based drills. So could be Toriandos. It could be knee on belly, side to side, things like this. I absolutely remember, being a blue belt and doing a lot of these drills. Like a lot of the gyms that I trained at in my early years did these old school type calisthenic workouts and a lot of solo drills. I remember my depth of knowledge was nowhere near as high, but my movement was really, really good. And maybe that's my youth. Maybe that's just me being younger and having, less injuries and just being able to give her in the training room. But my movements were really, really good and really explosive during these partnered movement drills. So I do believe that there's some kind of an application there. And I just want to say, uh, you know, I want to bring up the topic of eco and is it the best way? And I think that we get hung up on the best, right? Is there a way to find the best practice or the perfect practice? And I think anyone who tells you that they have the best way is, um, I don't want to say the word lying because that insinuates that they might know that they're lying. They might believe that and it might not be true, right? And then again, that begs the question: is it a lie then, right? Like if I believe something so much in my heart, am I really lying if I ended up that I'm wrong? Like I believed that, right, in my heart. And so I think that when you have the attitude that you know the perfect practice or you know the best way to learn something or teach something, um, you're just not questioning yourself enough. And it's what you know today could change a month from now. It could change a year from now. I've experienced that so many times in jiu-jitsu that I'm just done saying that I've got the best way. Like I'm not an absolute kind of guy in jiu-jitsu because I've had so many times where I'll be like, "Okay, I found the best way." And then I'll watch an instructional or whatever, and I'll see that and be like, "Oh, there's a different way I could do that, and it looks even more effective." Or I've decided that I didn't like the way that I did something, and so I'm never going to do it again. And then I watch an instructional and somebody does it, and I'm like, "Oh, that actually is good in a certain scenario," right? It all depends on the scenario. And so another thing about the eco crowd is they always say, that this is the best way we learn something. It's like I'm not saying don't do live training to build skills and to problem solve. That's 100% true. You need to do that. But there also needs to be an aspect of learning where we're introducing something new to someone and they have no idea how to do it, and now we have to introduce it to them in a way that they can do it and then now start to increase resistance. Then after they're familiar with the content, you can increase resistance to the point where it's live training, right? Where it's live randori or where it's a full-on task focused games. Either way, as the coach, you're on this search to develop the perfect practice for your student. Understand it's okay to make mistakes. I remember when I first started doing eco, I was on a phone call with Greg Souders, and he literally told me, he's like, "Just so you know," like right as right as we were about to hang up, he's like, "Yeah, just so you know, you are not going to do this right. Like when you first start, you're going to have a lot of failure. It's going to be frustrating. It's a skill to become an ecological coach. By the way, there is a new book that just dropped from Rob Gray. I believe it's called Learning to Be an Ecological Coach. So definitely going to check that out. Unlike the guys in the comment section, when I introduced Greg, they're like, "Matt he doesn't read the literature." It's like, no, dude, I do read the literature. I read Rob Gray's books and all these other books, but it's like, at the same time, I'm not sold that that's the 100% best way. It takes a holistic approach to practice where we're also incorporating drilling and things like that. And then on the side, we're also becoming better athletes in the weight room and whatnot. So it's all part of a holistic approach to becoming the best jiu-jitsu fighter you can be. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to try a task focused game. And then after, you sit back as a coach and you're like, "Well, that sucked. That was not how I thought it was going to go. It wasn't constructive from the student's point of view, and it kind of didn't work the way that I wanted." But still, in that context, you figured out what didn't work, right? As the coach. And so this is all part of the trial and error of jujitsu, life, coaching jujitsu, designing a good practice. Is like some games are going to work awesome. Some games are going to completely fall flat. Like sometimes I introduce the kids to games, and at the end of the game, I look and I'm like, well, they totally fucked that up. It didn't work. So that was on me because I did not design the game a way that they could comprehend it and perform it. Right. And so I'd like to quote an absolute legend of basketball coaching, the UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden. He said, "If you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing anything. I'm positive that a doer makes mistakes." End quote. I love this attitude, right? Like it's okay to make mistakes because you find out what didn't work. By the way, guys, there's a couple weeks ago, my buddy Ben Wilson from How to Take Over the World. It's a fantastic podcast, one of my favorite podcasts. He just released an episode on John Wooden, and that's why I'm digging into the John Wooden quotes. And you should check out that episode, especially if you coach sports, because John Wooden was an absolute legend. One thing he talked about too was like, how hard should we push these athletes in practice? And hit one of his main things that he pushed on his students was conditioning, right? And you might say, okay, Matt, well, if we're going to have a technical practice, where do we get the conditioning? Where does that happen? Well, we have to encourage our students to work hard, right? Another quote from John Wooden is, quote, "If a player appeared to be taking it easy in practice, I told him, don't think you can make up for it by working twice as hard tomorrow. If you have it within your power to work twice as hard, why aren't you doing it now?" End quote. And this is a great sentiment, because you will see people slacking, especially with kids. I find kids always try and get away with what they can. They always want to talk. They always want to waste time in class and joke around and just chit chat, more so than adults. But if you see that somebody's slacking when they shouldn't be, I think it's important to just remind them, hey, like, you're in here, a couple of hours a week. That's when I see the kids, I say, like, I only see you like maybe 2 hours a week, or if you're really dedicated, 3 to 4 hours a week. Like, you're here for a very short amount of time when you think about it. There's 24 hours a day. You're here, make the most of your time. Try to make the most out of your practice. When you're doing your roles, really apply yourself and think, what is the objective for this practice? What is the objective for this sparring session? Maybe you want to work a new guard. Maybe you never want to get your guard passed. Maybe you want to hit a new move or a new sweep or get to a new position, or you're getting ready for a competition. You want to win all the rounds, or you really want to get your heart rate up and see if your techniques are still effective. When your heart rate is up, like, go into practice with some kind of a focus as the student. And every coach should go into that practice as well with some kind of a focus. It could be, we're getting ready for a competition. It could be we're working this new position. We're trying to work our guard retention. It's infinite, like I said. But the number one thing is we're here to get better, right? And one of the things that John Wooden was so big on was conditioning, and really trying to make everybody do things faster, right? Okay, we did it good. Do it faster now. Do it faster, because you're going to compete the way that you train. And I think this is where, like, speed drills and things can really become valuable, because for years I neglected speed drills, and then I would go compete and I would not move fast because I wasn't training that. But then once you add speed drills and things like plyometrics, these things all build movement and agility. And we are in the business of movement, right? Unless, there are styles like Gordon Ryan out there who's not really so much into creating movement, but yet his movements are perfect, right? And his game is based more around immobilizing and pinning. But that being said, there's a lot of different people out there in jiu-jitsu, especially in the gi, who have these movement-based games, right? This sort of Brazilian flair, as Danaher talks about, and this must be trained, right? And so that's why I think that there is a fine line when you're training somebody between, okay, we're going to do movement drills and we're going to work on the technical portion of things, but there has to be some kind of a balance, right? It can't be just all movement drills. It can't be just all drills. It can't be just all eco. And again, I know anyone who's part of the eco crowd who's listening to that disagrees. That's okay. But, go tell the Mendez brothers they're doing it wrong. Go tell John Danaher they're doing it wrong. You can say that I have never read the literature. Show me one scientific study that shows this in the sport of jiu-jitsu. It doesn't exist. We don't have that, right? So until, if we want to be evidence-based and science-based, then where's the evidence that this applies in jiu-jitsu? Jiu-jitsu is different from a game of hockey or a game of tennis. This is chess, not checkers. It's infinite. There's new moves all the time. There's new positions all the time, every year. I literally just learned a new submission last week. And I drilled it, and I was able to use it that day. Right? So, like, are you telling me there's no application of that implicit instruction where I watched somebody do something, I practiced it against non-resistance, then I tried to do it in training, and I was able to do it the same day? So how is that not evidence that explicit instruction is valid? And again, that can be true, and it can be true that eco is also valid. Both can be true. Both can be a part of the holistic approach. It's either one way or the other way. I do believe that it is almost disingenuous. I believe that it's almost a marketing strategy to try and reinvent the wheel and look at learning as something completely different. And I do believe both can be valid and both can be part of a balanced coaching curriculum. Oh boy, going right at the eco guys. So we just sort of compared explicit instruction versus self-organization. Self-organization being like task-focused games. You're encouraged to find your own results. Greg told me once, I'm not showing the students what to do. I'm showing them where to look. And I thought that was quite profound, and I really, really enjoyed that. But there's still times where I feel like, okay, we know that this technique has existed for hundreds of years, right? Like this wrestling, what a cow catcher, for example, or body lock takedown, like fundamental ancient techniques have been around for years, and we know things about these techniques. You can absolutely show somebody details on these techniques that can make it more effective immediately in practice. And I don't care what anyone says, because I've seen it and I've felt it myself. So I do believe that with self-organization, one amazing thing about self-organization, when a student discovers something for themselves without being told, there definitely, in my experience, is a very profound, that knowledge that you've gained really sticks. Like when you discover something for yourself, it almost embeds itself in your memory. Like you're not going to forget it because you discovered it. And like, that was like a huge moment for you. I've had so many of these moments in jiu-jitsu, but to say that, somebody can't show me from whizzer versus underhook, some things to look out for so I don't get countered. Like it's ridiculous. These techniques have been around for a long time. We are in the modern. Right now, jiu-jitsu is as modern as it's ever been right now, okay? And tomorrow it'll be the same thing. And a year from now, it'll be the same thing. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We've learned a lot from the people who paved the way for this sport. We've learned their systems, and quite honestly, I take them for granted too much. We all do. And so to say that you can't learn from watching something is ridiculous, right? You absolutely can learn from explicit instruction, in my opinion. Do moves exist? The whole argument from the eco guys is, well, moves don't exist because there's infinite variables. So if I do an armbar on you and then I try and recreate that armbar, even if it's the same, the same application of the technique, it's going to be different because there's going to be different variables. Skin's going to be slippery. Maybe you're wearing a rash guard. Maybe you're not. Maybe your thumb is slightly turned this way. Maybe my foot is slightly over here, whatever. I think that that's also, again, not a genuine argument because you can absolutely recreate techniques. Are they going to be exactly the same? No. Just because you drilled an armbar on somebody 100 times with no resistance, does that mean you'll be able to do it live? No, absolutely not. So you do need both. You need to know the depth of knowledge within the technique, but you also need to implement that in a live situation, right? It's almost like, imagine, I'll use an example of something I know nothing about. Imagine a police officer or a detective who just graduated and he's top of his class and he's super book smart, right? And then you throw him on the street and he gets killed in 2 seconds because he has no idea how to talk to gang members, right? He's trying to be undercover or whatever, and he has no idea what he's doing on the street. So it's like, you could be so smart. You could have all the knowledge in the world and be super book smart and have no idea how to apply it. And that's where the two need each other. You need to have the past knowledge that we've already acquired, and the breadth of knowledge and the depth of knowledge in these techniques. And you need to know how to problem solve and use these techniques in a live situation against somebody who doesn't want it to happen, and somebody in a different environment, right? Every time is going to be in a different environment. Sure, I get that. That doesn't mean that I can't recreate an armbar. It doesn't mean that I can't create, a standard quarter or a 3/4 juji and do it the same way. We all hit the same moves all the time. Is it exactly the same? No, but can we recreate the same move? Yes. Can we call it a specific technique to make the process of classifying that technique easier? Yes. So when I say armbar from closed guard, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? If I say omoplata from closed guard, you know generally what I'm talking about. Maybe my feet are triangled, maybe they're not. Maybe you're locking your hands, maybe you're not. Maybe your hands grabbing your own leg, maybe your hands grabbing your belt. These are all different variables, but it is a technique. It's the same technique. To say that there's no such thing as techniques, again, I think it's I understand why that would be said, but I just disagree with it. So I believe that techniques exist. Drilling helps. I even believe solo drills help. Again, the example I used with Greg was the Tynan Dalper long step pass drill. He uses the solo drill movements, and it improved his long step, improved my long step. I have students where I showed that to them, improved their long step. So if it helps you do the move better against somebody who's resisting, how is there not an application? Show me the scientific study that says that it doesn't help when it's related to specifically the sport of jiu-jitsu. All the top teams drill in every sport, right? All the Olympic teams drill in every sport in jiu-jitsu. It's just, they do it every time. And it's common. And I don't know if it's something that we shouldn't just be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, especially when, again, there's no jiu-jitsu based evidence for that. And again, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm okay with that. It's okay to be wrong. But until I see the top eco teams who are 100% eco winning all these tournaments, like, we don't really have the evidence to back up that claim that only live training is the best. I believe that there is a balance. And I also want to say that, my class makeup is like 80-20 live to drilling. So the majority is live. Like, I'm giving that, live randori and eco-based training 100% needs all the credit in the world, because that is how you implement these skills in training. But the drilling or creative drilling, like, I love having a class that's like 60 or 50% live and 50% creative drilling, because the student still gets that immediate feedback when their partner's resisting, and they still get the creativity to do whatever comes to them, right? So it is almost like eco drilling in a way. And things can always change. Practices can always change. Like I said, it's okay to know if you are, if something didn't work, but just recognize something didn't work and try and learn from it. Okay. Also we kind of talked about kids and adults throughout the episode, how it differs teaching kids and adults. Again, kids, I think task focused games are incredible for kids. I also think that things like movements and solo movements, especially when they're like a couple months into the sport, are very useful. Like one example is bridging. I tell my students, hey, you got to bridge and shrimp and get your knee back inside. I look at them, they look at me like, Coach Matt, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? What does a bridge mean? And then I'm like, okay, guys, bring it in, circle up. Okay, here's how you bridge. Everybody start bridging. I look around, nobody can do a fucking bridge. So like, okay, holy shit. Like, that's my fault as a coach. So I need to bring everyone together and say, okay, let's work on our bridging. Something as fundamental as that. Let's bridge. Okay, now I'm looking around. Okay, so people are starting to get their hips off the floor now. Okay, now really arch your back and bridge to the side. Don't just bridge up and down. Okay, now I'm seeing they're starting to get it. Okay, now I want you to bridge and go right into a shrimp. Okay, and now they do that. And then we go into a live situation. I say bridge. They know what the fuck I'm talking about, right? So again, explicit instruction and solo movements, valuable in these situations. Okay, in conclusion, let's wrap this up because I gotta go teach. It's okay to not know the best way. Just keep looking for the best way, right? Can we ever make perfect practice? Can we ever find perfection? Honestly, I don't think we can, but we can keep looking for it. And as long as we have that attitude that we haven't found it, we're going to keep looking for it. That's always going to be an environment where there's going to be positive gains and productivity. Aim for perfect practice. Right? Go into practice as a coach with a goal. Our goal is to get better, but within that parameter, I want to work on deep half guard. I want to work on hand fighting from the standing position. I want to work on guard passing, tripod passing, whatever it may be. It could be super specific. It could be super broad as a topic, but whatever it is, it's to get the student to be better than when they came in the door. I would also recommend, especially for competitors, train to simulate the difficulty of competition, right? Just like John Wooden, he always said, do things faster, right? Everything's about conditioning in basketball. Faster has to be faster. If we don't go faster, we're not going to train this hard. We're not going to play like we should. We're not going to be as fast as the other team. We're not going to be as well conditioned. And even there were players on his teams at UCLA who said, with John on our side, we didn't really fear the other team because our conditioning was so good. We out-conditioned everyone. Plus, in the gym that they trained in, there was no air conditioning, and it got super hot when they were playing. And so the other teams came in, and they were not accustomed to this type of temperature when they played, and that really it weighed on them, and they were used to it. They were conditioned to it. So I do think that there is a time and place to make things like speed and agility and movement a priority in practice. I just don't know that it's every single practice, but I do think that it is, it's important to talk about for sure. And it's something that I am trying to emphasize more. The majority of my instruction for the last couple of years has been based around technical advancement, right? Getting better technically. But man, especially if you have competitors in the room, you can't neglect the power of conditioning, movement, agility, right? This is something we see in every top level of sport. And last thing I'll say is questions are important. So when you are trying to design a perfect practice, always ask for the feedback from students. Always say, does anybody have questions? I know people have come from other gyms who had said, every time I ask my coach a question, they would almost get pissed at me and they wouldn't really have the greatest answers. I don't always have the greatest answer when somebody asks me a question. There are times when someone asks me a question and I'm like, to be honest, I don't fucking know. I should know that. Let me get back to you because I don't know. And that's totally okay, guys. It's okay to not know everything. But try not to have the attitude where it's like, yeah, I know everything. And, I have all the answers, because we just don't, right? We just don't have all the answers. All right, guys. So that was my episode on the perfect practice for BJJ. I hope you guys liked this episode. If you did, please leave a comment below. Please like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channels, both of them if you can. Really, really helps me. And again, like and leave comments and check out my online academy if you want some more of my content. If you want to support my show, please check out the links on the bottom. It is very much appreciated. All right, you guys. I'm going to see you next time. Remember, the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Take care. Bye-bye.